The injured seal appeared beneath Blackstone Lighthouse during the first hour of dawn, when the Atlantic fog was so thick that keeper Isaiah Brooks could barely see the waves striking the rocks below. At first, he thought the pale shape moving through the surf was a piece of torn fishing net. Then it lifted its head and released a weak, breathless cry. The young gray seal dragged itself onto the narrow beach, fishing line wrapped tightly around one flipper and blood spreading across its wet fur. Isaiah hurried down the cliff steps with a rescue blanket and cutting knife, but the animal did not remain still. Each time he approached, it pulled itself toward the northern rocks, stopped, and looked back at him. Isaiah followed, expecting to find another injured seal or an abandoned net. Instead, the animal led him through a gap between two enormous boulders and stopped beside a bright purple child's backpack wedged above the tide line. One strap was torn. A silver keychain shaped like a moon hung from the zipper. Isaiah recognized it from missing person posters displayed across every shop and harbor building in the county. The backpack belonged to 9-year-old Sophie Grant, who had disappeared with her mother during a ferry accident 11 months earlier. Search crews recovered her mother's coat and several pieces of wreckage, but neither body was ever found. Isaiah pulled the backpack free and discovered that it was almost dry. Someone had placed it between the rocks recently. Inside were crackers, a flashlight, a child's inhaler, and a folded page covered in shaky handwriting. The message contained only 7 words. "Please find me before the light goes out. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments." Would you follow an injured wild animal into the fog if it seemed determined to show you something? Isaiah Brooks had lived at Blackstone Lighthouse for 12 years. At 49, he was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown skin, a closely trimmed gray beard, and the quiet patience of a man who had learned not to fight the weather. The lighthouse stood on a narrow island 2 miles off the coast of Maine, surrounded by reefs that had destroyed ships long before modern navigation. Most lighthouses were automated, but Blackstone remained staffed because its old electrical system failed frequently, and the surrounding waters carried fishing vessels, ferries, and cargo ships through dangerous fog. Isaiah maintained the beacon, monitored radio channels, recorded weather conditions, and rescued people who underestimated the sea. He had once served in the Coast Guard, leaving after a helicopter accident injured his shoulder and killed 2 men from his crew. The lighthouse gave him distance from crowds, but not from responsibility. He lived alone in the keeper's house except during summer, when his niece Maya visited from Boston. On the mainland, people described Isaiah as reserved. Fishermen knew he always answered distress calls. Children knew he allowed them to climb the lighthouse stairs during school tours. Animals seemed to understand that he moved carefully. Seabirds nested near his windows, and injured seals sometimes rested on the southern beach until marine rescuers arrived. But none had ever led him to evidence from a missing child. Sophie Grant disappeared on October 14th of the previous year. She and her mother, Emily, boarded the evening ferry from Belhaven to Port Mason after visiting Sophie's grandmother. The weather forecast warned of rain, but no major storm. 40 minutes into the crossing, the ferry lost power near Blackstone Reef. Emergency generators failed, smoke filled the lower deck, and passengers rushed toward the lifeboats. A cargo vessel reached the scene within 20 minutes, but one lifeboat was missing and part of the ferry had flooded. Emily and Sophie were among 6 passengers never found. Investigators concluded that Emily carried her daughter into the water when panic separated them from the evacuation route. Sophie had severe asthma, and searchers believed cold exposure would have made survival impossible. The official report called the disaster a mechanical failure caused by poor maintenance. Isaiah never fully accepted it. He had been on duty that night. Before the ferry reported losing power, he saw its navigation lights turn away from the normal channel and approach the restricted northern side of Blackstone Island. He radioed the captain but received no reply. Minutes later, the vessel transmitted an emergency message claiming engine failure. Isaiah also heard another voice on the radio, low and hurried, saying, "The transfer is not complete." The recording later vanished from the official communications archive. When Isaiah reported this, investigator Calvin Ross said fog and radio interference probably caused him to misunderstand an unrelated vessel. Isaiah knew what he heard, but without a recording, his statement changed nothing. The injured seal remained beside Sophie's backpack, while Isaiah called Marine Wildlife Officer Hannah Cole and Sheriff Lena Grant. Lena shared Sophie's surname, but was not related to the family. She had led parts of the original shoreline search and arrived by patrol boat less than an hour later with 2 deputies. Hannah treated the seal, cutting away the fishing line and identifying a small metal tag attached beneath it. The tag was not from a wildlife study. It carried the letters BMR and the number 17. Isaiah had seen those letters before. Belhaven Marine Research operated a private laboratory on Gull Island, 6 miles north of Blackstone. The company claimed to study ocean pollution and fish disease, but its docks were protected by armed security, and local fishermen were warned not to approach. BMR had provided technical consultants during the ferry investigation. Its director, Dr. Victor Hale, testified that chemical smoke from overheated batteries caused confusion among passengers. Hannah examined the tag and said no legitimate researcher would attach metal beneath constricting fishing line. Someone had intentionally marked the seal. Sophie's note was written on the back of a laboratory food inventory sheet bearing the same BMR logo. Lena closed the backpack carefully. "This was not carried here by the tide," she said. "The crackers were fresh, the batteries inside the flashlight were new, and the inhaler had been prescribed only 3 months earlier." The pharmacy label listed another child's name, but the dosage matched Sophie's medical records. Either someone prepared the backpack recently to create false hope, or Sophie had survived for 11 months. Isaiah looked toward the seal. The animal had regained enough strength to lift its body. When Hannah tried moving it into a transport crate, it resisted and pulled toward the water. She decided to stabilize it on the beach until a rescue team arrived. The seal entered the shallow surf, swam several yards, and turned north. It repeated this movement several times, making short circles as though unwilling to leave without being followed. Hannah warned that injured animals did not guide investigations like trained dogs. Isaiah agreed, but the fishing line, numbered tag, and backpack connected the seal to a place or person. Lena requested a search warrant for BMR property. A judge denied the emergency request, saying the evidence did not establish that the backpack came directly from the laboratory. Dr. Hale claimed inventory sheets were discarded regularly and could wash ashore anywhere. He also said BMR had never used numbered metal tags on seals. Within 2 hours, company lawyers were already responding to evidence no one outside law enforcement should have known existed. That leak made Lena cautious. She limited further communication to a small team. Isaiah studied the handwritten note. The words "before the light goes out" could refer to the lighthouse, a flashlight, electricity, or something only Sophie understood. On the lower corner, almost hidden beneath a water stain, she had drawn 3 shapes: a lighthouse, a seal, and a square window divided into 4 panes. Beneath them were the numbers 214. Blackstone Lighthouse had 4 windows on its lantern room, but no room numbered 214. Belhaven Marine Research had several buildings. Lena obtained old construction documents from county archives. Building 2 on Gull Island contained a lower corridor, and room 14 was marked as cold storage. The notation could mean Building 2, Level 1, Room 4, or 214 as a single room number. The team needed more. Isaiah returned to the rocks where the backpack was found. Behind the boulders, he discovered shallow drag marks and several small fish arranged in a line. The fish were fresh but partially eaten. Someone had been feeding the seal in that hidden place. A narrow waterproof tube was tied beneath one rock. Inside was another message written in the same handwriting. "Mr. Lighthouse, Mom said you would look. Follow Misty when the horn sounds twice." Isaiah's hands trembled. Emily Grant knew him. During the ferry trip, passengers had toured Blackstone Lighthouse while waiting for a delayed departure. Emily and Sophie spent nearly an hour speaking with him. Sophie asked how the beacon worked and whether people still needed lighthouse keepers when ships used GPS. Isaiah told her machines helped, but someone still had to notice when the machines lied. Emily remembered those words. If she survived the ferry disaster, she may have told Sophie to seek him. The young seal was apparently named Misty. The phrase, "when the horn sounds twice," referred to BMR's shift signal. Fishermen reported hearing a deep foghorn from Gull Island at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening, though the facility denied using one. That evening, Isaiah, Lena, Hannah, and 2 Coast Guard officers waited in an unmarked boat behind Blackstone's northern reef. Misty rested in a padded enclosure near the stern. At exactly 6, a horn sounded once across the fog. 30 seconds later, it sounded again. The seal became agitated, climbed over the low barrier, and entered the water. A tracking line was not attached because Hannah refused to risk further injury. They followed slowly as Misty swam north. Fog concealed the boat from shore. The seal moved toward Gull Island but did not approach the main dock. Instead, it entered a rocky inlet on the western side where sewage pipes emptied into the sea. One pipe was large enough for a person to crawl through during low tide. Fresh scratches marked its rim. Misty climbed onto a concrete ledge and pressed her nose against a grated opening. Behind it, Isaiah heard a child coughing. Lena called Sophie's name. The coughing stopped. Then a small voice answered, "Is the lighthouse man there?" Isaiah moved close to the grate. "I'm here, Sophie." She began crying but remained quiet, as though afraid someone would hear. She explained that she was inside a maintenance chamber connected to the laboratory. Her mother was alive but injured. Several other people were imprisoned in rooms deeper underground. Guards checked the chamber after the evening horn. They had less than 20 minutes. Lena radioed for federal support, but Gull Island's security system jammed signals near shore. The team had to move away from the island to transmit, losing time. Isaiah asked Sophie whether the grate could be opened. She said it was locked from the outside, but an emergency release existed inside room 214. Her mother had sent Misty through the drainage pipe carrying notes and food. Emily trained the seal using fish from the laboratory's animal holding tanks. Misty returned repeatedly, and Sophie finally tied the numbered tag and backpack to a floating strap, hoping the seal would carry them toward Blackstone. The line became tangled around Misty's flipper during the journey. Sophie did not know whether the animal reached Isaiah until she heard his voice. Footsteps echoed beyond the pipe. Sophie whispered, "They're coming," and disappeared. Lena ordered the team back to the boat. A security light swept across the inlet seconds later. 2 armed guards appeared above the ledge and fired toward the water. The officers returned fire while Isaiah pulled Misty aboard. The boat escaped through the reef, but one Coast Guard officer was wounded in the shoulder. By the time federal teams reached Gull Island, Dr. Hale claimed criminals had attacked his research facility and attempted entering through hazardous drainage infrastructure. He denied holding anyone and invited inspectors to search selected buildings. Lena insisted on a full warrant. The child's voice, gunfire, and physical evidence finally provided enough cause. Tactical teams entered the island before midnight. Building 2 appeared empty. Room 214 was a standard storage room containing frozen fish samples, but one wall had been recently painted. Thermal cameras detected a hollow space behind it. Officers broke through and found a staircase descending beneath the laboratory. The underground complex was far larger than the public plans showed. It contained locked dormitories, medical rooms, surveillance stations, and a private dock accessible through a sea tunnel. Several rooms had been cleared minutes earlier. Beds were warm, food remained on tables, but prisoners were gone. A computer displayed evacuation instructions directing staff to transfer subjects to Vessel Crown before law enforcement reached the island. The Crown was a converted research ship registered to a shell company controlled by Victor Hale. Radar showed it leaving Gull Island without lights. Isaiah returned to Blackstone's lantern room and scanned the water through the fog. The lighthouse beacon swept over waves every 12 seconds. On the 4th rotation, he saw a dark ship moving behind the eastern reef, taking a route large vessels avoided. Hale's crew expected navigation buoys to guide them through a hidden channel. Isaiah understood Sophie's message. Before the light goes out, someone at BMR planned to disable Blackstone's beacon so the Crown could pass unseen or make pursuit boats strike the reef. Minutes later, the lighthouse generator failed. The main light went dark. Emergency power should have activated automatically, but the backup system had been sabotaged. Isaiah found wires cut inside the lower control room. A maintenance contractor had visited 2 days earlier after BMR reported interference with its instruments. He had planted a remote device. Isaiah started the old diesel reserve manually, but fuel lines had been damaged. He could restore the light only by climbing inside the lantern assembly and connecting power directly, risking electrocution and severe burns. Lena urged him to wait for technicians. The Crown was already moving through the channel. Without the beacon, Coast Guard vessels could not safely intercept in the fog. Isaiah climbed. His injured shoulder nearly failed as he pulled himself onto the maintenance platform. Wind shook the tower. He connected the emergency circuit using insulated tools and a cable from the radio system. The beacon flashed once, went dark, then began turning. Its light swept across the sea and revealed the Crown less than a mile offshore. Coast Guard crews adjusted course. The ship attempted accelerating through the reef, but Isaiah radioed exact bearings from the lantern room. The captain of the Crown ignored orders to stop. Someone aboard fired at the pursuing vessel. The Coast Guard disabled the ship's engine with targeted shots. Tactical officers boarded. In the lower cargo deck, they found 15 prisoners, including Sophie and Emily Grant. Emily had a fractured leg, untreated infection, and scars from repeated restraints. Sophie was thin and pale but alive. She clutched a torn piece of gray blanket that smelled strongly of fish, the cloth she had used when caring for Misty. Victor Hale escaped in a smaller boat before the boarding. His security chief, Dean Mercer, took Sophie as a hostage and tried reaching Blackstone Island through the reef. Isaiah saw the boat from the lighthouse and descended to the northern beach. Misty, recovering in Hannah's temporary enclosure, became frantic when the motor approached. The seal entered the water before Hannah could close the gate. Dean's boat struck a submerged rock and stalled near the beach. He dragged Sophie into the water, holding a gun above the waves. Isaiah moved toward them with his hands visible. Dean demanded access to the lighthouse and a working radio. He believed a helicopter could collect him from the island. Sophie struggled to breathe in the cold water. Her asthma inhaler had been taken. Isaiah kept Dean talking while Lena and Coast Guard officers approached through the rocks. Misty circled behind the boat. The seal struck the surface beside Dean, startling him. Sophie pulled free and moved toward Isaiah. Dean fired, but the shot went wide. Lena arrested him seconds later. Isaiah wrapped Sophie in his coat and carried her above the tide line. She looked toward Misty. "She found you," Sophie said. "You gave her somewhere to go," Isaiah answered. Emily's testimony revealed what happened aboard the ferry. She worked as an accountant for a shipping insurer and discovered suspicious payments connected to BMR and several maritime disasters. Ships carrying experimental chemicals suffered mechanical failures near Gull Island. Passengers with useful technical or medical skills disappeared during evacuations, while others were declared drowned. BMR operated an illegal human testing program funded through pharmaceutical companies and protected by corrupt officials. The laboratory tested treatments for hypothermia, respiratory distress, and chemical exposure on abducted people. Ferry accidents provided victims whose disappearances could be blamed on the sea. Emily copied records and planned to contact federal investigators. Victor Hale learned of it through her supervisor. The ferry's route was altered deliberately. Security men boarded from a BMR vessel during the fog, disabled communications, and created smoke below deck. Emily, Sophie, and 4 others were removed before the ferry was abandoned. Hale expected everyone to be listed among the missing. Investigators, including Calvin Ross, accepted evidence manufactured by BMR consultants. At Gull Island, Emily refused to identify where she stored the copied records. Hale kept Sophie alive to control her. Emily eventually discovered that seals used in pollution studies could move through the drainage system. Misty was young, curious, and accustomed to people. Sophie fed her every day. Over months, the seal learned to travel between the holding pool and sea inlet. Emily wrote messages, but early attempts failed because guards found them or Misty returned without reaching another shore. Sophie remembered Isaiah in the lighthouse. She used pieces of reflective material and fish to encourage Misty toward Blackstone. The final attempt succeeded because she included her backpack, which had been kept among confiscated belongings. The pack was too heavy for the seal to carry directly, so Sophie tied it to a small floating frame. Misty pulled it through the pipe and across the water until the frame broke near the rocks. Fishing line from laboratory equipment tightened around her flipper. Injured and exhausted, she reached the lighthouse because the rotating beacon and feeding routine had become part of the route Sophie taught her. Federal agents found Emily's copied records inside a safe deposit box registered under Sophie's grandmother's name. The evidence connected BMR to 9 staged maritime emergencies and at least 31 missing people. Some victims had died during experiments. Others were moved to private medical facilities under false names. Victor Hale's network included shipping executives, doctors, coast officials, and investigators. Calvin Ross had removed Isaiah's radio recording from the ferry case and altered the incident timeline. He was arrested while attempting to leave the country. Victor Hale was found 3 weeks later hiding aboard a yacht in Canadian waters. He claimed BMR's underground facility was a classified research site and that the prisoners were volunteers unable to leave because of medical quarantine. Security footage showed guards beating captives, falsifying consent forms, and threatening families. Dr. Hale, Dean Mercer, Calvin Ross, and numerous employees were charged with kidnapping, murder, unlawful human experimentation, conspiracy, obstruction, and maritime sabotage. The trials lasted nearly 3 years. Defense lawyers argued that Emily fabricated the conspiracy after causing the ferry accident herself. Survivors, laboratory records, financial transfers, and video evidence proved otherwise. The official ferry report was withdrawn. Families who had been told their loved ones drowned learned that several survived for years in hidden facilities. Some reunions were joyful. Others came too late. The sea had been blamed for crimes committed by people who understood how easily water erased evidence. Emily and Sophie returned to the mainland, but recovery was not simple. Sophie feared windowless rooms, alarms, and foghorns. She slept with a flashlight and panicked when doors locked. Emily blamed herself for investigating alone and for failing to protect her daughter. Therapists helped them understand that responsibility belonged to the people who abducted them. Isaiah visited without pressing them to discuss the island. He repaired Sophie's moon-shaped keychain and placed it back on the purple backpack. The bag remained stained with salt and torn along one side. Sophie refused a new one. "This one finished the trip," she said. Hannah rehabilitated Misty at a coastal wildlife center. The fishing line wound healed, though one flipper remained slightly weaker. Experts warned that the seal could not live as a pet or symbol. She belonged in the wild. Sophie understood, even though releasing the animal felt like losing the friend who carried her hope beyond the laboratory walls. On the day Misty returned to the ocean, Sophie stood beside Isaiah and Emily on Blackstone's northern beach. Hannah opened the transport crate. The seal hesitated, looked toward the waves, and moved into the water. She surfaced twice near the rocks before disappearing into the fog. Tracking tags showed Misty remained near the coast for several years. She occasionally rested on Blackstone Island, though Isaiah never fed or approached her. Whenever he saw a gray head rising beyond the rocks, he recorded the time in the lighthouse log. Sophie later asked why. "Because noticing is my job," he said. Blackstone Lighthouse underwent major repairs after the investigation. New backup systems were installed, and communication recordings were stored independently, so no single official could erase them. Isaiah remained keeper despite offers to move into administration. He preferred the tower, the weather, and the responsibility of watching a dangerous place closely. Sophie visited every summer. As she grew older, she studied marine engineering and helped design emergency systems that could not be disabled from one control point. She also worked with organizations reviewing disappearances at sea when no bodies were recovered. Her work challenged the assumption that water always explained missing evidence. Emily became an advocate for whistleblowers and families dismissed as irrational when official reports contained contradictions. She testified before lawmakers about private research facilities and maritime investigations. The case changed regulations governing restricted islands, research vessels, and missing passengers. Independent teams were required to review incidents involving communication failure and unverified deaths. None of these changes could return the victims who died, but they made it harder for future crimes to hide behind fog and machinery. Misty lived at least 16 years, an old age for a wild seal. During her final documented season, she returned to Blackstone with scars across her back and rested beneath the lighthouse for 2 days. Sophie was 24 then. She sat at the top of the cliff with Isaiah, watching through binoculars. They did not go down. On the third morning, the seal was gone. Her tracking tag never transmitted again. Sophie placed no memorial on the beach because Misty had never belonged to the island or to her. Instead, she donated the purple backpack to a maritime rescue museum. Inside the display were the original note, the BMR inventory sheet, and a photograph of the injured seal beside the rocks. The silver moon keychain still hung from the zipper. A plaque beneath it read, The sea did not return the evidence. A living creature carried it. Visitors often simplified the story. They said an injured seal rescued a missing girl by leading a lighthouse keeper to her backpack. Isaiah corrected them when asked. Misty did not understand criminal networks, laboratory rooms, or the meaning of handwritten words. She knew Sophie fed her. She knew the drainage path. She knew the rotating light across the water and the rocks where she could rest. The seal carried what Sophie gave her and continued through injury until instinct, memory, and the beacon brought her to Blackstone. Sophie created the message. Emily preserved the evidence. Isaiah recognized the backpack. Hannah traced the tag. Lena refused to accept convenient explanations. Rescue teams entered the island. Many choices opened the locked rooms. But the first choice belonged to an injured animal that could have remained hidden among the rocks. Instead, Misty pulled herself toward the lighthouse keeper, then turned back until he followed.